400 guests raised their glasses. The champagne was flowing, the ballroom was glowing, and the bride had never felt more beautiful. But while Harper Ellington stood alone at the head table, waiting for her husband to return from a phone call, Chase Whitmore was 18 floors above her, in a penthouse suite with another woman, on their wedding night. And the words she heard through that door would change everything. She won't question it. Girls like her are just grateful someone picked them. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She walked back to the bridal suite, picked up the marriage documents, and signed the divorce papers before her bouquet had even wilted. But here is what Chase Whitmore did not know. His bride was 7 weeks pregnant. She had a tiny pair of baby shoes in her suitcase, wrapped and ready for a surprise that would never come. And buried inside this company he was desperate to protect was a secret connected to the one person Harper had spent her entire life grieving, her mother, a woman who did not leave, a woman who was silenced. What Chase meant to be an ending became Harper's beginning, and what she uncovered would bring a $4 billion empire to its knees. This is not just a story about betrayal. This is a story about a woman who lost everything and discovered she was the only thing she ever needed. Lesson and value. Before we begin, I want you to know why this story matters. It is not just entertainment. It is a reminder that the moments when you feel most alone, most broken, most powerless, are often the exact moments when your real strength is born. You do not need someone to rescue you. You need to remember that you are worth rescuing yourself. If you have ever been underestimated, abandoned, or silenced, this story is for you. Now, if you are ready, settle in, because this story is a long one, and every twist will hit harder than the last. And if at any point something in this story touches your heart, do me a small favor. Tap that like button. Leave a comment telling me which moment hit you the hardest. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. And if you have not yet, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Because this channel, this community, it is built for people like you and me. People who believe that no matter how dark the night gets, the morning always comes. Let us begin. The champagne was still fizzing in her glass when Harper Ellington realized she was already alone. 400 guests filled the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, their laughter rising like music beneath crystal chandeliers that scattered golden light across white tablecloths and towering floral arrangements. The string quartet played something soft and romantic. Waiters glided between tables carrying silver trays. Everything was perfect. Everything was designed to look like a fairy tale. But fairy tales, Harper was learning, had a habit of rotting from the inside. She stood near the head table in her cathedral-length wedding gown, a glass of sparkling water disguised as champagne in her hand, watching her brand-new husband press his phone to his ear and slip through a side door without looking back. Chase Whitmore moved the way he always did, with the casual arrogance of a man who believed the world would wait for him. And it usually did. "Just a minute," he had whispered, his tone clipped, his eyes already somewhere else. Business call. That was 30 minutes ago. Harper set her glass down carefully, pressing her fingers against the cool surface of the table to steady herself. She scanned the room. Chase's mother, Patricia Whitmore, was holding court near the dessert station, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, laughing at something a senator's wife had said. Chase's father, Richard Whitmore, stood near the bar with 2 men in dark suits, their conversation low and serious. No one seemed to notice the groom was missing. No one except Harper. She reached for her phone and called Chase. It rang 5 times and went to voicemail. She called again. Same result. A third time, nothing. A knot tightened in her stomach, but she forced herself to smile. When a guest approached to congratulate her, "You look absolutely radiant," the woman gushed. "Chase is such a lucky man." "Thank you," Harper managed. "He really is." The woman moved on. Harper's smile dissolved. She found her only real friend in the crowd. Margot DeLuca was leaning against a marble column near the bar, her dark curly hair already escaping its pins, a champagne flute in each hand. Margot was a paralegal at a midtown law firm, loud, blunt, fiercely loyal, and the kind of friend who would hide a body for you and then complain about ruining her manicure. "Have you seen Chase?" Harper asked quietly. Margot raised an eyebrow. "Not since his toast," which, by the way, was 3 minutes long, and mentioned his company 4 times and you twice. I counted. He said he had a business call. On his wedding night? Margot took a long sip. Charming. Harper hesitated. "I'm sure it's nothing." Margot studied her face for a moment, then softened. "Hey, it probably is nothing. Go find him. I'll guard the cake. If his grandmother tries to cut it early again, I'm throwing elbows." Harper almost smiled. Almost. She squeezed Margot's arm and walked toward the elevators. The hallway outside the ballroom was quieter, the music muffled behind heavy doors. Harper's heels clicked against marble floors as she pulled out her phone again and opened the Find My app. She and Chase had synced their devices months ago. He had set it up himself, insisting it was practical. "In case you ever need to find me," he had said, with that easy grin she used to trust. She needed to find him now. The blue dot pulsed on her screen. 18th floor, the penthouse suite. Harper stared at the dot for a long moment. Then she pressed the elevator button. The ride up felt endless. She watched the numbers climb, her reflection ghost-like in the polished brass doors. She looked beautiful. She knew that objectively. The dress was a custom Vera Wang, ivory silk, with hand-sewn lace that cascaded down her back like water. Her dark hair was pinned with pearl clips. Her makeup was flawless. She looked like a bride who had everything. The elevator opened. The 18th floor was hushed, carpeted in deep burgundy, lit by soft wall sconces. Harper walked slowly down the corridor until she reached the penthouse door. She raised her hand to knock. Then she heard laughter. A woman's laughter, low and intimate, followed by Chase's voice. The words were muffled, but she pressed closer, and then one sentence cut through the door with brutal clarity. "She won't question it. Girls like her are just grateful someone picked them." Harper's hand froze midair. Her breath stopped. The hallway tilted. She stood there for 11 seconds. She counted them later, replaying this moment in her mind like evidence. 11 seconds of standing outside the door of her own wedding night, listening to her husband describe her as something disposable. She didn't knock. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She turned around and walked back to the elevator. There is a moment when you realize the person you trusted most has just described you as nothing, and everything inside you wants to run back and demand an explanation. Maybe you heard wrong. Maybe there is context. Maybe there is some version of this that does not destroy everything you believed. But here is what no one tells you. The explanation does not matter. What matters is what you do in the next 60 seconds. Harper returned to the bridal suite on the 12th floor. The room was pristine, untouched, waiting for a wedding night that would never happen. Rose petals scattered across wall Versailles white sheets, a bottle of Dom Perignon sweating in an ice bucket, and on the silver tray beside the bed, the marriage documents. She picked up the pen. Her hand was steady. She signed every page. Then she removed her Tiffany engagement ring, a 4-carat oval diamond that had felt like a promise and now felt like a price tag, and placed it on top of the papers. She opened her suitcase, to grab her coat, and her fingers brushed something small and soft. A tiny pair of baby shoes, wrapped in tissue paper, tucked into the corner of her bag. She was 7 weeks pregnant. She had planned to tell Chase tonight. She had imagined his face lighting up. She had imagined him spinning her around, laughing, saying they were going to be a family. Harper held the baby shoes in her palm for a long moment. Then she placed them back in the suitcase, zipped it shut, and walked out of the Plaza Hotel at 1:47 in the morning. She did not look back. The November air hit Harper like a wall of ice the moment she stepped through the revolving doors. Her wedding gown offered no protection against the cold. The silk clung to her skin, and the cathedral train dragged across the wet sidewalk, soaking up rain and grime from the New York streets. She pulled her suitcase behind her and tried to hail a cab. 3 passed without stopping. A woman in a soaked wedding dress, dragging luggage at nearly 2 in the morning, was apparently not the kind of passenger anyone wanted to deal with. Harper started walking. She did not know where she was going. She just knew she could not stand still. Her phone buzzed. A text from Chase. "Where did you go? Come back upstairs. We need to talk." She turned the screen off and kept walking. The city moved around her with its usual indifference. A couple stumbled out of a bar, laughing. A delivery driver, on a bicycle, swerved past her. A homeless man huddled under a scaffolding awning, wrapped in a sleeping bag. None of them looked twice at the bride walking alone through Midtown Manhattan. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Margot. "Where the hell are you? I just found your ring on the tray. Harper, talk to me." Harper answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was with someone, in the penthouse. I heard him say I was just grateful someone picked me." 3 seconds of silence, then Margot's voice, stripped of all humor, all sarcasm, completely raw. "I'm getting my car. Tell me exactly where you are, and do not move." "I'm on 5th Avenue near 58th. Stay there." "I will be there in 12 minutes, and do not you dare cry on that dress. It costs more than my rent." 11 minutes later, a dented Honda Civic screeched to the curb in front of a fire hydrant. Margot jumped out, still in her bridesmaid dress, mascara slightly smudged, heels in one hand. A Plaza valet, who had apparently followed the commotion outside, waved at her frantically. "Ma'am, you cannot park there." Margot pointed at him. "I will end you, Bradley." "My name is not Bradley. I do not care." She wrapped her arms around Harper, who had finally stopped walking and was standing on the sidewalk trembling, not crying, just trembling, like something inside her was breaking apart at a frequency too low to hear. "Get in the car," Margot said gently. "You are sleeping at my place tonight. Tomorrow we figure out how to destroy him. Tonight, we eat cereal." The drive to Margot's apartment in Astoria was quiet. Harper stared out the window, watching the city blur past. Margot did not fill the silence with platitudes. She did not say it would be okay. She did not say Harper deserved better. She just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on Harper's arm. At Margot's apartment, a small one-bedroom, with mismatched furniture and a kitchen that smelled permanently of garlic, Harper changed out of her wedding dress. The zipper snagged twice, as if the gown was refusing to let her go. When she finally pulled it off, it crumpled on the bathroom floor like a deflated ghost. She put on borrowed sweatpants and a college hoodie that said Fordham Law, almost, and sat on Margot's couch with a bowl of Lucky Charms she could not eat. "I need to unpack a few things from my suitcase," Harper said quietly. "Can you hand it to me?" Margot dragged the suitcase over. Harper unzipped it and reached for her phone charger, but her hand found something else first. The baby shoes, small, white, impossibly soft. She held them in her open palm and stared at them. "I was going to tell him tonight," she whispered. Margot froze. "Tell him what?" "I'm pregnant. 7 weeks." The apartment went completely silent. Margot sat down slowly on the coffee table across from Harper. Her face changed completely. The sarcasm drained away. The toughness softened. What remained was something fierce and tender and absolutely certain. "Okay," Margot said. "New plan. We don't just destroy him. We protect you first." Harper nodded, pressing the baby shoes against her chest. Outside, Manhattan hummed with its relentless energy, millions of lives intersecting and diverging, and somewhere in that tangle, Harper Ellington was trying to figure out how to build a future from wreckage. The next morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Gray light pushed through Margot's thin curtains. Harper woke on the couch with a stiff neck and the immediate, crushing awareness that yesterday was not a nightmare. Her phone showed 23 notifications, 14 missed calls from Chase, 1 voicemail, 8 texts. The voicemail was 4 seconds long. "Harper, this is ridiculous. Call me." The texts escalated in tone. The first was almost polite. "We should talk?" The last was not. "You embarrassed me in front of 400 people. Come home. We will fix this." Not, "I am sorry." Not, "Let me explain." Not, "Are you okay?" "You embarrassed me." Harper deleted every message. Margot emerged from the bedroom with 2 mugs of coffee, handed one to Harper, and sat on the floor, cross-legged. "All right, let's think clearly. What do you need right now? Legally, medically, practically?" "I need a lawyer," Harper said. "The divorce papers I signed, I do not even know if they are valid without his signature. I will ask around at my firm, discreetly." Margot pulled out her phone and started typing. "What about money?" "I have $2,300 in savings. My paycheck hits Friday." "Okay, that is tight but survivable for now." "What about the pregnancy? Have you seen a doctor?" "Not yet. I just found out last week with a home test." "We are making an appointment today." Margot looked up from her phone. "Harper, listen to me. Whatever you decide about this baby, it is your decision. Not his, not anyone's. Yours." Harper wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. "I already decided. I am keeping this baby. Then we build a plan around that." Harper nodded. For the first time since last night, something other than pain flickered in her chest. It was small and fragile, but it was there. Purpose. But across the city, in the penthouse suite of the Plaza Hotel, Chase Whitmore was building a very different kind of plan. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Manhattan skyline spread beneath him like something he owned. His tuxedo jacket was draped over a chair. A glass of whiskey sat untouched on the windowsill. Behind him, Belle Stanton lay on the sofa, scrolling through her phone with practiced boredom. Belle was 31, blonde, razor-sharp, and utterly without conscience. She had been Whitmore Capital's Director of Public Relations for 3 years and Chase's mistress for 2. She understood power the way some people understood music, instinctively, effortlessly, and without sentiment. "She will come back," Belle said without looking up. "They always do." "She signed the papers," Chase replied. Belle laughed softly. "Papers do not mean anything until they are filed, and you control the filing." Chase turned from the window. "My father is going to lose his mind." "Your father chose her specifically because she had no one. No family, no connections, no safety net, a foster kid with an engineering degree and a desperate need to belong." Belle sat up, crossing her legs elegantly. She was the perfect wife for the IPO, humble, hardworking, photogenic, and completely controllable. Chase said nothing. He knew all of this. He had known it from the beginning. His father, Richard Whitmore, had identified Harper 2 years ago at a company event. She was everything they needed for public optics. A self-made woman, a feel-good story, the kind of wife who made a billionaire look human. Chase did not love her. He was assigned her. "What about the pregnancy?" Belle asked casually. Chase froze. "What pregnancy?" Belle smirked. "I went through her bag last week, found prenatal vitamins hidden in a toiletry case. Did you really not know?" Something cold moved through Chase's chest. Not guilt, something more like calculation. If she is pregnant, the divorce gets complicated. Custody, child support, public sympathy. The timeline changes. "Then we need her back," Belle said, quickly and quietly. Chase picked up his phone and dialed. "Get me the legal team, now." Monday morning, Harper put on her best professional outfit, a navy blazer and pressed slacks borrowed from Margot's closet, and went to work. She needed normalcy. She needed to sit at her desk and open her engineering software and remember that she was good at something, that she had value beyond being Chase Whitmore's wife. Her firm occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower on 3rd Avenue. The office was sleek and cold, the kind of place where ambition was rewarded and personal problems were expected to stay in the parking garage. Harper had worked there for 3 years, steadily climbing from junior engineer to project lead on some of the firm's most important contracts, including Whitmore Capital's Midtown Tower project. She stepped off the elevator and felt the shift immediately. The receptionist, who usually greeted her with a bright smile, looked away. 2 colleagues standing by the coffee station stopped talking when they saw her. A junior architect gave her a look that was either pity or curiosity. She could not tell the difference anymore. Harper kept her head up and walked to her desk. She opened her computer. She would lose herself in work. She would be fine. 20 minutes later, her boss appeared. Gerald Patterson, a tall man with graying temples and the permanent expression of someone calculating liability, stood in the doorway of her cubicle. "Harper, can I see you in my office?" She followed him down the hallway, already knowing. The way he avoided her eyes, the way his assistant looked away as they passed. Gerald closed the door and sat behind his desk. He did not offer her a seat. "Harper, I will be direct. I need to let you go." The words landed like stones in still water. "Whitmore Capital is our largest client," Gerald continued, his voice careful and rehearsed. "Chase's office called this morning. They indicated that your continued employment here creates a conflict of interest given your personal situation." "My personal situation," Harper repeated flatly. "You mean the fact that my husband cheated on me on our wedding night?" Gerald shifted uncomfortably. "I'm letting you go because the client requested it. It is a business decision." "It is retaliation," Harper said quietly. Gerald did not respond. He slid a folder across the desk. "Your severance package. 2 weeks. HR will walk you out." Harper stood. Her legs felt hollow, but she stood. She looked at Gerald Patterson, a man she had respected, a man whose project debits she had saved from costly errors more than once, and she saw nothing in his eyes except relief that the conversation was almost over. "You know this is wrong," she said. "I know this is business," he replied. She walked out with a cardboard box of personal items. A framed photo of the Manhattan skyline she had taken from the Brooklyn Bridge. A mug that said, "Trust the process." A small cactus Margot had given her that somehow refused to die. No job, no husband, 7 weeks pregnant, no family, $2,300. Rock bottom, Harper was learning, was not a place. It was a series of trapdoors. Every time you thought you had hit the floor, another one opened beneath you. And the trick was not avoiding the fall. The trick was learning to fall without letting go of who you are. She called Margot from the sidewalk outside her former office building. They fired me. A pause. Then Margot's voice, steady as iron. Come home. We are going to figure this out. 1 week later, Harper was living on Margot's couch, rationing her savings and applying for engineering positions that would not call Whitmore Capital for a reference. She had her first prenatal appointment at a clinic in Queens. The doctor confirmed the pregnancy, healthy so far, and scheduled her for an early ultrasound. Harper sat in the parking lot afterward and cried, not from sadness, from the terrifying, overwhelming weight of being solely responsible for a life she already loved more than she knew how to express. That evening, Margot came home from work with a USB drive and a look on her face that Harper recognized. Trouble. Remember your work laptop? Margot said. IT wiped it after you were let go, but I may have copied your project files before that happened. Margot, how did you... Do not ask how. Just look at what is on it. Harper plugged the USB into Margot's ancient desktop computer and opened the files. The Midtown Tower Project, Chase's flagship development, a 60-story luxury residential building in the heart of Manhattan. Harper had been the lead structural engineer on the foundation design. She opened the most recent blueprint and began reviewing the sub-level plans. Within minutes, her trained eye caught something that made her blood run cold. A load-bearing support column had been deleted from the sub-basement design, not accidentally. The deletion was precise, surgical. Someone had deliberately removed a critical structural element from the foundation. Harper ran calculations. Without that column, the building would pass initial inspection. It would stand. It would look fine, but microfractures would develop within 5 to 7 years. Under seismic stress or extreme load, the sub-basement could partially collapse. What is it? Margot asked, watching Harper's face. Harper cross-referenced the current blueprint with the original permit filing, which was a public record she pulled from the city's online database. The original design included the column. The revised plan submitted 3 weeks ago did not. Someone changed it after the permit was approved. But the bigger question consumed her. Why remove a load-bearing column? What was in that space instead? She dug deeper into the file layers and found it. A secondary blueprint overlay that did not appear on any public filing. A sub-basement extension. An unauthorized underground space hidden beneath a 60-story building. Harper turned to Margot, her face pale. He is not just cutting corners. He is hiding something underneath that building. Harper spent 3 days building her case. She compiled the original and modified blueprints side by side, annotated the structural deficiencies, calculated the risk factors, and prepared a formal complaint with supporting documentation. She was methodical. She was thorough. She was an engineer, and this was what engineers did. They found the cracks before the building fell. On Thursday morning, she walked into the New York City Department of Buildings and filed her complaint. The clerk behind the counter was a tired woman in her 50s who had clearly processed 10,000 complaints before and expected this one to be equally forgettable. But as she flipped through Harper's documentation, her expression shifted. "This is detailed work," the clerk said. "I was the lead structural engineer on the project," Harper replied. "These modifications are dangerous." The clerk stamped the paperwork and handed her a receipt. "An inspector will review the complaint within 5 business days. You will receive a callback." Harper left the building feeling something she had not felt in weeks. Power. Not the kind that came from money or connections, the kind that came from knowing something true and refusing to stay quiet about it. 2 days later, the inspector called. Miss Ellington, we reviewed your complaint regarding the Whitmore Capital Midtown Tower project. Whitmore Capital has submitted an updated structural analysis from an independent engineering firm, Carlton and Associates, confirming that the current design meets all safety codes. Based on their certified documentation, your complaint has been closed. Harper gripped the phone. That analysis is fraudulent. Carlton and Associates is owned by a subsidiary of Whitmore Capital. They are not independent. The inspector's voice was flat. Ma'am, we can only work with certified documentation submitted through proper channels. If you believe the analysis is inaccurate, you are welcome to hire your own structural firm to perform an independent review at your own expense. Harper hung up. She sat at Margot's kitchen table, staring at the phone in her hand. Margot set a glass of water in front of her. So they own the inspectors too? They own everyone. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Chase Whitmore had not just cheated on his wife on their wedding night. He had built an entire system designed to silence anyone who questioned him, and Harper was beginning to understand that she was not the first woman to be caught in that system. But the worst was not over. It was barely beginning. 3 days after her complaint was dismissed, Harper opened her phone to find 47 notifications, group chats, coworkers, unknown numbers, social media tags. Her stomach dropped before she clicked a single one. The first link was a video, shaky footage of Harper crossing the Plaza Hotel lobby on her wedding night. Her wedding dress soaked, her mascara streaked, her suitcase catching on the carpet. She looked devastated. She looked broken. She looked exactly the way someone wanted her to look. The caption read, "Whitmore bride has public meltdown after jealous outburst at reception." The video had been edited, cuts that removed context, angles that made her look erratic and wild-eyed, instead of heartbroken and dignified. Someone had crafted this footage like a weapon. Within 48 hours, the damage was catastrophic. A source close to the family told Page 6 that Harper had a history of emotional instability. Chase appeared in a carefully staged interview, looking solemn and concerned. "I love my wife," he told the camera. "I am praying she gets the help she needs." Harper's LinkedIn was flooded with messages from strangers calling her unstable, attention-seeking, and worse. Belle Stanton's fingerprints were all over it. Every leak, every caption, every perfectly timed statement. This was not gossip. This was a public relations campaign designed to destroy Harper's credibility before she could ever use her voice. Then came the blow that nearly broke her. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a name she had not seen in years. Danielle, her foster sister. The one person from Harper's childhood she had trusted, the girl who shared a bunk bed with her in their third foster home. The girl who used to braid Harper's hair and whisper that they would be sisters forever. "Danielle," Harper answered, desperate for an ally. Did you see what they are doing to me? I need someone to... Harper, I am sorry." Danielle's voice was flat, rehearsed. "Sorry for what?" "I did a podcast interview. About you. About our childhood." Harper's throat tightened. "What did you say?" "I said you always had anger issues, that you made up stories for attention." The silence lasted 5 seconds. It felt like 5 years. "Why?" Harper whispered. "They paid me $15,000, Harper. I have kids. I have bills. I am sorry." The call disconnected. Harper sat on Margot's bathroom floor, her back against the tub, her hands wrapped around her stomach. She was not crying for Chase. She was not crying for her reputation, or her career, or the life she thought she had. She was crying for her child. "What kind of life am I bringing you into?" she whispered to the small life growing inside her. Margot found her there, 20 minutes later, sat down beside her on the cold tile and did not say a word for a long time. Then she spoke, and what she said was not comfort. It was truth. Listen to me. The worst thing about being lied about publicly is that you start questioning your own memory. Did I overreact? Was I too emotional? Am I the problem? But here's the truth, Harper. If someone has to launch an entire campaign to make you look crazy, it is because your sanity terrifies them. Harper stopped waiting for someone to save her. There was no one coming, no powerful ally, no secret protector, no fairy tale rescue. There was Margot. There were public records, and there was her engineering degree. That would have to be enough. She started spending her evenings at the New York Public Library, the main branch on Fifth Avenue with the stone lions out front. Her work laptop was gone. She could not afford a new one. But the library had free computers and free internet, and no one asked why a pregnant woman in borrowed clothes was spending 7 hours a day searching through corporate archives. She was looking for patterns. If Chase had modified the Midtown Tower blueprints, maybe this was not the first time. Maybe Whitmore Capital had a history. It took her 4 days to find the thread. Buried in a digitized archive of the New York Times from 20 years ago, she found a brief mention of a whistleblower complaint filed against Whitmore Capital by a former structural engineer. The article was 3 paragraphs long and treated the story as a minor footnote. The engineer's name was redacted in the public filing. Harper filed a Freedom of Information Act request the next morning. Then she waited. 2 weeks is a long time when your savings are disappearing, your name is being dragged through public mud, and you are growing a human being inside your body. Harper counted every dollar. She ate ramen and peanut butter sandwiches. She went to her prenatal checkups at a low-cost clinic in Queens where the waiting room chairs were cracked and the magazines were 3 years old. At one of those checkups, the ultrasound technician was an older woman named Ruth. Silver hair pulled back in a bun, reading glasses perched on her nose, hands gentle and warm as she applied the gel. Ruth noticed Harper was alone. She did not pry. She did not ask where the father was or why Harper's eyes were red. She just performed the ultrasound, pointed out the tiny heartbeat on the screen, and said something that Harper would carry with her for a long time. You know, my daughter raised her boy by herself for 5 years before things got better. That kid is at Princeton now. You are going to be fine. Harper blinked back tears. Ruth handed her a box of tissues and added, "Honey, crying is free. Take all you need." The FOIA response arrived on a Tuesday. Harper was at the library when she opened the envelope. Inside was a partially redacted document, the original whistleblower complaint filed against Whitmore Capital 20 years ago. Most of the technical details were blacked out, but the complainant's name was not. Evelyn Ellington. Harper stared at the name until the letters blurred. Her mother. The woman who had walked out of her life when Harper was 7 years old. The woman Harper had spent 21 years believing had simply abandoned her, left without a note, without a reason, without looking back. Her mother had not abandoned her. Her mother had tried to expose Whitmore Capital. And then she had vanished. Harper's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the document. She photographed every page with her phone, returned the originals to the envelope, and walked out of the library into the November cold. She called Margot. "I need to find someone who worked with my mother." "Your mother? Harper, you never talk about your mother." "Because I thought she left me." "She didn't leave. She tried to blow the whistle on Whitmore Capital, and then she disappeared." "Margot, they did something to her." Silence. Then Margot's voice. Steady as always. "Tell me what you need." What Harper needed was buried in 20-year-old company directories, archived employee records, and one name that kept appearing next to Evelyn Ellington's in meeting minutes and project logs: Claire Woods, Administrative Assistant, Department of Structural Engineering, Whitmore Capital, 2004 through 2006. It took Harper 3 days to find her. Claire Woods was 67 years old, retired, living in a small town in Connecticut called Essex. The kind of place with a single main street, a white church steeple, and neighbors who waved at each other from their porches. Harper borrowed Margot's Honda Civic and drove 2 hours north. She found the house, a modest colonial with blue shutters, and a garden that had been put to bed for winter. She sat in the car for several minutes, hands on the steering wheel, trying to breathe. Then she walked to the door and knocked. The woman who answered was small, white-haired, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She took one look at Harper, and her face crumpled. "Oh my God," Claire whispered. "You look exactly like her." They sat in Claire's living room, surrounded by floral wallpaper and framed photos of grandchildren. Claire made tea with trembling hands and told Harper everything. Evelyn Ellington had been a brilliant structural engineer. She had worked for Whitmore Capital for 4 years, and she had discovered the same thing Harper discovered 20 years later: unauthorized modifications to building foundations. Structural supports removed to create hidden sub-basement spaces. Spaces that, according to internal documents Evelyn had found, were being used to facilitate money laundering operations. Evelyn had filed an internal report. 2 days later, Richard Whitmore, Chase's father, had called her into his office personally. "She came out of that meeting white as a sheet," Claire said, her voice trembling. "She told me Richard threatened her, told her to forget what she had seen, told her that people who asked too many questions about Whitmore Capital had a tendency to disappear." "But she did not stop," Harper said. "No." Claire shook her head. "Your mother was the bravest woman I have ever known. She told me she was going to contact the FBI. She gave me a copy of her complete report and told me to keep it safe, just in case." "Just in case what?" Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Just in case something happened to her." 3 days later, she was gone. Her apartment was empty. Her phone was disconnected. She had just vanished. Police investigated for 6 months and ruled it voluntary. Case closed. Harper could barely breathe. "You kept the report?" Claire stood, walked to a bookshelf, and pulled out a weathered manila envelope from behind a row of hardcover novels. "For 20 years, I was too afraid to do anything with it. I am ashamed of that every single day." She handed the envelope to Harper. Inside were 43 pages of technical documentation, financial records, internal memos, and photographs. And at the very bottom, a handwritten note on a folded piece of lined paper. Harper unfolded it. Her mother's handwriting. She recognized it from a single birthday card she had kept from childhood, the only thing she had left. "If something happens to me, it was not an accident. Tell Harper I did not leave. I would never leave." Harper pressed the note against her chest and closed her eyes. For 21 years, she had believed her mother chose to leave. She had built her entire identity around that abandonment. The foster homes, the temporary beds, the birthdays spent alone, all of it shaped by the belief that her own mother did not want her. It was a lie. Her mother had not left. Her mother had been taken. And the same people who took her had married Harper to keep her controlled. Harper returned from Connecticut with her mother's report and a fire burning in her chest that no amount of fear could extinguish. She had spent her entire life being quiet, being grateful, being small enough to fit into spaces other people made for her. Foster homes that were never permanent. A marriage that was never real. A career that evaporated the moment she became inconvenient. She was done being small. Her first call was to a journalist. Catherine Brooks was an investigative reporter at the New York Times who had built her reputation covering real estate fraud and corporate corruption in New York City. Harper had read her work in the library. Catherine was thorough, fearless, and had a reputation for protecting her sources. They met at a diner in the East Village. Catherine was in her late 40s, sharp-eyed, dressed in a rumpled blazer, with a pin perpetually behind her ear. Harper laid out everything: the modified blueprints, the unauthorized sub-basements, her mother's whistleblower report, the pattern spanning 20 years. Catherine listened without interrupting, making notes on a yellow legal pad. When Harper finished, the journalist sat back and exhaled slowly. This is significant. If even half of this is verifiable, it is the biggest real estate fraud story in New York in a decade. It is all verifiable, Harper said. I am a structural engineer. The math does not lie. I believe you, but I need more than documents. I need corroboration from someone inside Whitmore Capital, a current or former employee willing to go on record. Without that, my editors will not run it. Harper nodded. She understood. One woman's word against a $4 billion corporation. She needed more. I will find someone, Harper said. Catherine leaned forward. Be careful. Companies like Whitmore Capital do not just fire whistleblowers, they bury them. The words echoed in Harper's mind as she left the diner. They bury them, just like they buried her mother. 3 days later, Harper had a plan. The Whitmore Capital Winter Gala was scheduled for Saturday evening at the Metropolitan Club on East 60th Street. Every board member, major investor, and media figure in New York would be there. If Harper could get inside and confront Chase publicly, in front of witnesses and cameras, she could force a reaction that might crack the facade. She told Margot. Margot stared at her for a full 10 seconds. This is either the bravest or the dumbest thing you have ever done. Probably both, Harper admitted. Margot used a contact at her law firm to get Harper onto the guest list. On Saturday night, Harper put on a simple black dress, the nicest thing she owned, and took the subway to the Upper East Side. She was 10 weeks pregnant, barely showing, but she felt the weight of 2 lives as she walked through the doors of the Metropolitan Club. The ballroom was everything she expected: gold and crystal, designer gowns, the smell of expensive perfume and old money. Heads turned as she entered. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Is that her, the bride from the videos? She looks different than I expected. Who let her in? Harper kept her chin high and walked directly toward Chase Whitmore, who stood near the center of the room with a circle of investors, holding a glass of scotch and wearing the confident smile of a man who believed he was untouchable. His smile died when he saw her. I know about the sub-basements, Harper said, her voice calm and clear. I know about the structural fraud, and I know what happened to my mother. The investors shifted uncomfortably. Chase's hand tightened around his glass. You are making a scene, sweetheart, he said through his teeth. Good, Harper replied. Scenes are harder to cover up. For one electric moment, Harper felt the balance of power shift. She saw it in Chase's eyes, the flicker of real fear. She saw it in the way 2 investors exchanged glances. She saw it in the reporter near the bar who turned on her phone's recorder. Then the moment shattered. Security appeared. Not hotel security, private Whitmore security. 2 large men in dark suits who materialized beside Harper like shadows. Ma'am? You need to come with us, one of them said. Chase leaned close, his voice a whisper only she could hear. I told you not to test me. They escorted her out through a service exit. The hallway was cold and fluorescent lit after the warmth of the ballroom. Harper pulled her arm free from the security guard's grip and was about to walk away when she saw someone waiting outside by a black SUV, a man in a gray suit holding a manila folder. Harper Ellington? Yes. I am serving you on behalf of Whitmore Family Legal Counsel. He handed her the folder. Your husband has filed an emergency petition with the family court for a psychological evaluation. The petition claims you represent a potential danger to yourself and your unborn child. Harper's hands went instinctively to her stomach. He was not just protecting his company. He was not just trying to silence her. He was trying to take her baby. She stood in the cold outside the Metropolitan Club, holding legal papers that weaponized her own pregnancy against her. And she understood for the first time the full scope of what she was facing. Chase Whitmore was not going to let her walk away. He was going to destroy every part of her life until there was nothing left to fight with. Harper took a cab back to Margot's apartment. She held herself together for the entire ride, staring out the window, breathing slowly, refusing to break in front of a stranger. She broke the moment she walked through Margot's door. What followed was the worst night of Harper's life, and she had lived through many terrible nights, because when she and Margot entered the apartment, they found it destroyed. The door frame was splintered near the lock. Drawers were pulled open and emptied. Margot's ancient desktop computer was gone. The USB drive with the blueprint files was gone, and the manila envelope from Claire Woods, her mother's complete whistleblower report, was gone. Someone had broken in while they were at the gala. Professionally, surgically. They had taken everything. Margot stood in the middle of her ransacked living room, fists clenched, vibrating with fury. Those sons of... Harper's phone rang. Catherine Brooks, the Times journalist. Harper, I am sorry. I cannot run the story. Whitmore Capital's attorneys sent a cease and desist to the paper this afternoon and threatened to sue for defamation. My editor killed it. Catherine, please. The evidence is real. I believe you, but without corroboration and without the original documents, I have nothing my legal department will approve. I am sorry. My hands are tied. The call ended. Harper lowered the phone and looked at Margot. In the span of 3 hours, she had lost everything. Her evidence, her media ally, her last path forward. And on the kitchen counter, the certified letter waited. The psychological evaluation. If she failed to appear, Chase's lawyers would petition for emergency custody of her unborn child. Harper sank onto the floor of the destroyed apartment. Margot sat beside her. Long silence. He took everything, Harper whispered. Margot put her arm around Harper's shoulders. Not everything. He did not take you, and he sure as hell did not take me. There is a difference between losing and being beaten. Losing means the fight is over. Being beaten means someone hit you so hard you forgot you could hit back. Harper Ellington had been beaten, but she was not done. She let herself feel the devastation for exactly one night. She lay on Margot's couch in the destroyed apartment, staring at the ceiling, one hand resting on her stomach. She thought about her mother, a woman who had been brave enough to speak the truth and had been swallowed by silence. She thought about her baby, a life that did not ask to be part of this chaos, but deserved a mother who refused to surrender. By morning, she had a plan. I am going to the psychological evaluation, she told Margot over coffee. Margot nearly spit out her drink. What? That is exactly what they want. They are going to twist it. Some hired psychiatrist will write whatever Chase's lawyers pay him to write. No, Harper said. Family court psychiatric evaluations are performed by court-appointed professionals, not by the petitioner's chosen doctor. Chase can submit his evidence of my so-called instability, the viral video, Danielle's interview, the statement from my old boss, but the evaluation itself has to be fair, and I will pass it because I am not unstable. I am the sanest person in this entire story. Margot studied her. There is something else, isn't there? You have that look. Harper allowed herself the smallest smile. Chase's legal team has to submit all of their supporting evidence to the court as part of the petition. Once it is submitted, it becomes part of the legal record, and legal records can be subpoenaed. Margot stared at her. You are using their own attack as discovery. Every document they file to prove I am crazy becomes a document I can access and use to prove they orchestrated a smear campaign. Margot set down her coffee. You beautiful, terrifying genius. The evaluation was scheduled for the following Wednesday at a family court facility in Lower Manhattan. Harper arrived 15 minutes early, dressed neatly, hair pulled back, calm and composed. The psychiatrist was Dr. Patricia Voss, a woman in her early 60s with a no-nonsense demeanor and kind eyes behind rectangular glasses. The evaluation lasted 2 hours. Dr. Voss was thorough. She asked about Harper's childhood, her marriage, the events of the wedding night, her emotional state, her support system, her plans for the future. She reviewed the key evidence Chase's lawyers had submitted. Harper answered every question honestly. She did not minimize her pain. She did not pretend she was fine. She said she was heartbroken, frightened, and overwhelmed. She also said she was determined, clear-headed, and committed to providing a safe life for her child. When the evaluation ended, Dr. Voss looked at her over the rim of her glasses. Mrs. Ellington, I have reviewed all the materials submitted by the petitioner. I have also spoken with you at length. My assessment will reflect what I have observed today. 3 days later, the report was filed. Dr. Patricia Voss's conclusion was unambiguous. Ms. Ellington presents as a highly competent, emotionally regulated individual under extraordinary duress. No evidence of psychological instability, no indicators of risk to herself or her unborn child. Recommendation: no grounds for custody concern. Chase's emergency petition collapsed, but Harper was not done. She called Margot. I need the court filing documents, all of them, everything Chase's lawyers submitted. Margot, who had been studying law in night classes for 2 years and knew exactly how to navigate a court clerk's office, obtained copies within 48 hours. The documents confirmed what Harper suspected. The smear campaign was coordinated. Internal Whitmore Capital emails discussed the strategy. Belle Stanton's name appeared repeatedly. Talking points for the media, editing instructions for the viral video, and a payment authorization to Danielle for $15,000. It was all there. In their rush to destroy Harper's credibility, they had created a paper trail. Now Harper needed to rebuild what was stolen. She called Claire Woods. Claire, the documents you gave me were taken. Someone broke into my friend's apartment. I know, Claire said quietly. I saw the news. I have been scared sick. But Harper, I am old. Not stupid. I made 3 copies of your mother's report. One was in that envelope. One is in a safety deposit box in Vermont, and the third is with a friend in Boston. Harper closed her eyes. Claire, I could kiss you. Save it for someone your own age, sweetheart. The final piece came from the last person Harper expected, Daniel Reed, the senior engineer at Harper's former firm. The man who had warned her to stay quiet. The man who told her the people who challenged Whitmore Capital did not stay employed very long. Harper tracked down his personal email and sent him one message. No threats, no manipulation, just a question. If the Midtown Tower collapses in 10 years, can you live with the people who die? Daniel did not respond. But 2 days later, an unmarked flash drive appeared in Margot's mailbox. No return address, no note. Inside were complete internal communications proving Chase Whitmore personally ordered the blueprint modifications. Emails with timestamps, digital signatures, and explicit instructions to remove the load-bearing column to accommodate the hidden sub-basement expansion. Harper held the flash drive in her palm. She had the blueprint evidence. She had her mother's report. She had the proof of a coordinated smear campaign from Chase's own court filing. And she had a witness in Claire Woods. She did not call Catherine Brooks at the Times. She did not confront Chase at another gala. She did not post anything on social media. She called the FBI. The FBI field office in Lower Manhattan occupied a building that looked exactly like what it was: gray, institutional, and serious. Harper walked through the metal detectors on a cold December morning, 12 weeks pregnant, carrying a folder that contained 20 years of corporate fraud, witness intimidation, and one woman's disappearance. The agent assigned to her case was named Robert Harlan, mid-50s, square jaw, the kind of man who looked like he had heard every story and believed none of them until the evidence said otherwise. Harper sat across from him in a small conference room and laid out everything. The structural fraud in the Midtown Tower, the unauthorized sub-basements, Daniel Reed's corroborating communications, her mother's whistleblower report from 20 years ago, the coordinated campaign to discredit Harper and prevent her from speaking. Claire Woods, ready to testify. Agent Harlan listened without expression for nearly an hour. When Harper finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened a desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder of his own. "Ms. Ellington, I need to tell you something. The FBI has been investigating Whitmore Capital for 3 years." Harper blinked. "You already knew?" "We suspected. We had financial irregularities, suspicious property transactions, shell companies that did not add up. But we never had a structural engineer who could explain the physical evidence. And we never had a witness willing to testify." He looked at her steadily. "Until now." Harper swallowed hard. "I am willing to testify. You understand what that means. Whitmore Capital has resources. They will come after you with everything they have. They already have," Harper said. "And I am still here." Agent Harlan nodded slowly. Something like respect crossed his face. "There's one more thing you should know. During the course of our investigation, we discovered information about your mother." Harper's breath caught. "Is she alive?" The pause before his answer was the longest 3 seconds of her life. "Yes." The room tilted. Harper gripped the edge of the table. "Your mother did not disappear voluntarily," Agent Harlan continued. "She was placed into witness protection 20 years ago by a federal agent named Thomas Garrett. Agent Garrett was supposed to protect her. Instead, he was on Whitmore's payroll. He relocated your mother under a false identity and told her you would be placed with a good family, that you would be taken care of. But I wasn't," Harper whispered. "I was put in foster care. Your mother does not know that. She has spent 20 years believing you grew up safe and loved. She was told that any attempt to contact you would endanger both of your lives." Harper could not speak. Tears ran down her face, but she made no sound. 20 years. Her mother had been alive for 20 years, living somewhere under a different name, believing her daughter was safe. While Harper grew up alone, bouncing between foster homes, sleeping in temporary beds, spending birthdays with no one. Every time you think you understand the full weight of what has been done to you, another layer reveals itself, and each layer is heavier than the last. "Where is she?" Harper finally managed. "Bend, Oregon, living under the name Susan Mitchell." Harper pressed both hands flat on the table to keep them from shaking. "I want to see her." "After we move on Whitmore Capital," Agent Harlan said gently, "we need to coordinate the timing. If Chase or Richard Whitmore suspect the FBI is closing in, they will destroy evidence and possibly flee. We need to move simultaneously." "How long?" 2 weeks. 2 weeks felt like 2 centuries, but Harper had waited 20 years. She could wait 14 more days. She walked out of the FBI building into December sunlight, pulled out her phone, and called Margot. "She is alive," Harper said, her voice cracking. "My mother is alive." On the other end of the line, Margot, the toughest woman Harper had ever known, burst into tears. The FBI moved on a Tuesday morning, 2 weeks before Christmas. They hit 3 locations simultaneously: Whitmore Capital Headquarters on Park Avenue, Richard Whitmore's estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, and the construction site of the Midtown Tower, where a team of structural engineers and federal inspectors descended to document the unauthorized sub-basement. Harper watched the news coverage from Margot's apartment, sitting on the couch with a cup of tea she was too nervous to drink. Margot sat beside her, a bowl of cereal on her lap, because Margot processed all major life events through carbohydrates. The footage was surreal. FBI agents in windbreakers streaming through the glass doors of Whitmore Capital, employees being escorted out with their hands visible, documents being carried out in cardboard boxes. Chase Whitmore was arrested at his desk at 9:17 in the morning. The cameras caught him being led out in handcuffs, his perfectly tailored suit wrinkled, his face a mask of controlled fury. He looked directly into a camera lens, and for a split second, Harper saw the same expression he had worn on their wedding night. Not remorse, entitlement, the absolute conviction that the world owed him better than this. Richard Whitmore was arrested at his Greenwich estate. He was 71 years old and reportedly said nothing during the arrest. His attorney released a statement within the hour calling the charges politically motivated, and Belle Stanton was arrested at a spa in the Hamptons. She was still in a bathrobe when they cuffed her. Margot pointed at the screen with her spoon. A bathrobe. They arrested her in a bathrobe. That is the most satisfying thing I have ever seen. The charges were extensive: structural fraud, money laundering, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and in a separate filing, charges related to the forced disappearance and false witness protection of Evelyn Ellington. Thomas Garrett, the corrupt federal agent who had hidden Harper's mother, was arrested in retirement in Florida. Harper did not celebrate. She sat quietly, one hand on her stomach, and said to her baby, "It is over. We are safe." Margot looked at her. "You just took down a $4 billion company in your first trimester. Your kid is going to be terrifying." The aftermath unfolded rapidly. The Whitmore Capital Board of Directors issued a public statement acknowledging the fraud and announcing the immediate suspension of all construction projects pending independent review. The Midtown Tower project was halted. A team of independent structural engineers was brought in to assess every Whitmore property in the city. Investors lost money. Careers ended. Reputations crumbled. But no building collapsed. No one died. Because one woman with an engineering degree and a broken heart refused to look the other way. Catherine Brooks, at the New York Times, whose editor had killed the story weeks earlier, was given the green light to run a full investigative feature after the FBI's actions made the story undeniable. Her article, published 2 days after the arrests, ran on the front page above the fold. The headline read, "The Engineer Who Brought Down an Empire." Catherine called Harper that afternoon. "Your mother's story is in the piece. The full story. Everything they did to her and to you." Harper thanked her and hung up. Then she read the article 3 times, tracing her mother's name with her finger on the screen. But the public attention was not what Harper cared about. What she cared about was a small house in Bend, Oregon. Agent Harlan called her the morning after the arrests. "Ms. Ellington, your mother has been informed of the situation. The false witness protection order has been voided. She knows you are coming." How did she react? A pause. I have been doing this job for 27 years. I have never heard anyone cry the way your mother cried when she learned the truth about what happened to you. Harper packed a bag. Margot offered to drive, but Harper shook her head. I need to do this part alone. Margot hugged her at the door. Call me the second you get there, and do not speed. You have precious cargo. Harper flew to Portland and rented a car. The drive to Bend took 3 hours through mountain passes dusted with early snow. She watched the landscape change from urban sprawl to forest to high desert, and with every mile, she felt something shifting inside her. Not fear, not anticipation, something deeper. Something that felt like 21 years of unanswered questions finally approaching their answer. She arrived in Bend in the late afternoon. The town was small and quiet, framed by mountains and pine trees. She followed the GPS to a modest house on a residential street. Brown siding, a red door, a garden bed covered with burlap for winter. Harper parked in front of the house. She turned off the engine. She sat there for 5 minutes, hands on the steering wheel, heart hammering against her ribs. She called Margot. I am here. I am sitting in the car. Get out of the car, Harper. What if she does not recognize me? She is your mother. Get out of the car. Harper hung up. She walked to the red door. She knocked. Footsteps inside. A lock turning. The door opened. A woman stood in the doorway. Mid-50s, brown hair streaked with gray. The same jawline, the same dark eyes, the same hands, strong and capable, the hands of an engineer. Silence. The longest silence of Harper's life. Then Evelyn's hand went to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears. Harper? Harper nodded. She could not speak. She could barely breathe. 21 years collapsed into a single word. You didn't leave, Harper whispered. Evelyn pulled her daughter into her arms. I never left. I never stopped thinking about you. They told me you were safe. They told me you were happy. I believed them because the alternative was too terrible to survive. They held each other in the doorway of a small house in Oregon while the winter sun set behind the mountains. And for the first time in Harper's life, someone who was supposed to stay had actually stayed, not because circumstances allowed it, but because love survived even when everything else was stripped away. After a long time, Harper stepped back. She took her mother's hand and placed it on her stomach. I want you to meet someone. Evelyn looked down at Harper's belly, then up at her daughter's face, and her expression broke open with a joy so raw and sudden it looked almost like pain. Oh, sweetheart. Oh, my sweet girl. They stood there. 3 generations of Ellington women, connected by a hand pressed gently against a small life that represented everything they had lost and everything they were about to begin again. 6 months later, on a warm June morning, Harper Ellington gave birth to a daughter. She named her Evelyn Rose Ellington. No Whitmore, just Ellington. The baby was born at 7 pounds 4 ounces with dark eyes and tiny fists that gripped Harper's finger with surprising strength. Margot was in the delivery room, serving as both emotional support and self-appointed media coordinator. She live-texted Claire Woods, Ruth the ultrasound technician, who had become a family friend, and Evelyn, who was pacing the waiting room because she could not bring herself to sit still. When the nurse placed the baby in Harper's arms, the room went quiet. Margot, for perhaps the first time in her life, had nothing to say. She just stood there, with tears streaming down her face, and whispered, Well, kid, you picked one hell of a mother. Evelyn was the second person to hold her granddaughter. Her hands trembled as she cradled the baby against her chest. This impossible miracle, a grandchild she never expected to meet, connected to a daughter she never expected to hold again. She has your hands, Evelyn told Harper. Engineer's hands, Harper smiled. Then she will build something beautiful. The months that followed were not easy. Real life, Harper learned, did not wrap up as neatly as stories. There were loose ends and lingering wounds and days when the weight of everything she had been through pressed down so hard she could barely stand. But she stood anyway. Harper returned to work as a structural engineer, this time for a small firm that specialized in affordable housing. The pay was less than half of what she had earned before. The office was a converted warehouse in Brooklyn with exposed pipes and a coffee machine that worked only when it felt like it. Her colleagues were idealistic, overworked, and passionate about building homes for people who needed them most. Harper loved it. For the first time in her career, every calculation she made, every beam she designed, every foundation she verified, served a purpose she believed in. She was not building luxury towers for billionaires. She was building homes. Margot was named godmother, a role she took with absurd seriousness. She arrived at the christening with 2 baby onesies. The first said, "Future CEO." The second said, "My mom took down a billion-dollar company before I was born." The priest gave her a look. Margot shrugged. Claire Woods visited every month, taking the train down from Connecticut with a tin of homemade oatmeal cookies and the gentle, persistent devotion of a woman making up for 20 years of silence. She would hold baby Evelyn and cry happy tears every single time, and every single time she would apologize for crying, and every single time Harper would tell her to stop apologizing. Evelyn moved to New York, renting a small apartment 2 subway stops from Harper's. Their relationship was not simple. 21 years of separation could not be bridged with a single embrace. There were awkward silences. There were conversations that skated around painful truths. There were moments when Harper felt a flash of anger, not at her mother, but at the years they had been robbed of, the birthdays, the school plays, the skinned knees, the first heartbreak, all the ordinary moments that make a mother and daughter into something permanent. But they were trying. Every day they were trying. Evelyn came over for dinner 3 times a week. She learned how Harper liked her coffee. Harper learned that her mother hummed while she cooked. They discovered they had the same habit of tapping their pencils against the desk when they were thinking, a genetic quirk that made them both laugh the first time they noticed it. One evening, while Evelyn rocked the baby to sleep in the living room, Harper stood in the kitchen doorway, watching them. 2 Evelyns, old and new, grandmother and granddaughter, connected by a thread that had been cut 21 years ago and somehow, impossibly, reattached. "Mom?" Harper said quietly. Evelyn looked up. She still flinched slightly every time Harper called her that, as if she could not quite believe she was allowed to hear it. "Thank you for being brave enough to try," Harper said. "Back then, even though they punished you for it." Evelyn's eyes glistened. "I would do it again, 1,000 times. The only thing I would change is I would have found a way to take you with me." Harper nodded. "I know. Sometimes the deepest healing happens not in dramatic moments, but in ordinary ones. A shared meal, a familiar gesture, the quiet acknowledgement that love does not require perfection, only presence." The legal proceedings against Whitmore Capital continued for months. Chase Whitmore was denied bail. His attorneys fought every charge, but the evidence was overwhelming. Daniel Reed testified for the prosecution, his voice steady, his conscience apparently heavier than his fear. Claire Woods testified too, her small frame nearly lost in the witness box, but her voice clear and unwavering as she described what she had seen 20 years ago. Belle Stanton took a plea deal within 3 months of her arrest. She cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence, providing detailed testimony about the smear campaign against Harper and the internal operations she had overseen to protect Chase's public image. According to courthouse reporters, Bell cried exactly once during her deposition when she was asked whether she had ever considered that her actions might hurt another woman. She said she had not. She said she did not think about other women as real. Richard Whitmore, 71, suffered a stroke 2 months into the proceedings and was deemed unfit to stand trial. He was moved to a medical facility in Connecticut. His empire, built on fraud and silence and the destruction of anyone who stood in his way, continued to crumble without him. Danielle, Harper's foster sister, sent a letter. Harper read it once and put it in a drawer. She was not ready to forgive. Maybe she never would be. Maybe forgiveness was not the point. Maybe the point was simply moving forward without carrying the weight of other people's choices. The Midtown Tower was redesigned from the foundation up, with proper structural supports and no hidden spaces. An independent review of all Whitmore properties in New York identified 3 other buildings with similar modifications. All were retrofitted. The cost ran into hundreds of millions of dollars, borne by the company's remaining assets and insurance claims. No building collapsed. No one was hurt, because one woman with an engineering degree refused to look the other way. On a warm evening in September, Harper stood at the window of her apartment in Brooklyn, baby Evelyn asleep in her arms. The Manhattan skyline glowed across the river. Somewhere in that forest of steel and glass, the Midtown Tower crane had been removed. The site was being rebuilt. Correctly this time, Margot had gone home an hour ago. Evelyn was asleep in the guest room. The apartment was quiet. It was just Harper and her daughter and the hum of the city. She looked down at the baby's face, peaceful, unaware of everything that had brought her here, unaware that her mother had been abandoned on her wedding night, fired from her job, smeared in public, threatened with losing custody, and stripped of every piece of evidence she had fought to gather. Unaware that her grandmother had spent 2 decades in hiding. Unaware that a $4 billion empire had been brought down before she was born. All this baby knew was that she was warm and fed and held by someone who loved her. That was enough. That was everything. Harper whispered to her daughter the words she wished someone had said to her in every foster home, every empty bedroom, every birthday spent alone. You were with me through all of it. You were the reason I kept going. And I promise you, no one will ever make you feel like you don't belong. The city hummed. The baby slept. And Harper Ellington, who had once been a girl with no family, no safety, and no voice, stood in the window of her own home, surrounded by people she loved and who loved her back. Not because someone rescued her, but because when everything was taken away, she discovered that the one thing no one could steal was her refusal to stop fighting. Sometimes the bravest thing you will ever do is not fighting back. It is deciding that you are worth fighting for. Not for revenge, not for pride, but for the quiet, stubborn belief that you and the people you love deserve a life built on truth. If you have ever felt abandoned, if you have ever been told you are too much or not enough, if you have ever stood alone in a cold hallway, wondering whether anyone would come, I want you to know something. You are not alone. You never were. The obstacle is the way. The pain you are carrying right now may be the very thing that leads you to the life you were always meant to live. Healing is not loud. It is a decision made quietly, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes on a bathroom floor, sometimes in a borrowed pair of sweatpants, that says simply, I deserve better. And you do. You always did. If this story gave you strength, if it made you feel understood, even for a moment, share it with someone who needs it. Because somewhere, right now, someone is standing in their own cold hallway, wondering if they should keep going. Tell them, yes, tell them the story of Harper Ellington. Tell them that the bravest thing they can do is choose themselves. And if you are that person, if you are the one standing in the hallway right now, then hear me. Keep walking. The door ahead is closer than you think. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. Before you go, I want you to know something important. This entire story is a work of fiction. Every character, every company, every event was carefully created from imagination. Any resemblance to real people or real situations is completely coincidental. This content was researched, developed, and manually edited by our team with one purpose: to bring you meaningful stories that carry real lessons about resilience, courage, and the power of believing in yourself. Every word was chosen with care because we believe storytelling is one of the most powerful ways to heal, to inspire, and to remind each other that we are never truly alone. If this story gave you something today, even a small moment of strength or comfort, then we did our job. Thank you for being part of this journey. We will see you in the next one.